This is part 2 of the elements of argument and paragraphing lesson. So we covered this slide at the very end of the other one, and this is where we're going to pick up. So paragraphing is all the other components that deal with writing in addition to the elements of argument. So you'll have those elements, those 5 that we talked about. However, you will also have a transitional word or phrase, a topic sentence at the beginning, and then at the end of the paragraph you will have what we call a concluding statement. So first, a transition. A transition is a word or phrase that clearly and smoothly connects the previous paragraph to the next. And what this does is it just makes it very readable for your audience. They can follow along, they can see that we're moving on to a new idea. It just creates a flow in your writing and what we call readability. So these are some transition words and phrases that you might want to refer to again when you come to the point where you're writing your own paper. But when we look at the example, you will also be paying attention to these. So if you're beginning a new topic or even beginning, your first point, you have a lot of options. Let's start by, first of all, and so on. If you're starting another topic, you have some other options. Now let us move on to, next, let us consider, turning to, moving on to, things like that. And then to summarize or conclude, you have a couple options as well. In conclusion, to conclude, and so on. One thing I want to point out here is you can use first, second, third. It works, it's very basic, and there's nothing wrong with it, but there are so many other ways that you can do those pieces. And so these are ideas that are different than those. They accomplish the same purpose, but they just add a little bit more variety to your writing so that it's not so, just base level first, second, third. So keep that in mind too when you approach your own writing. Your topic sentence. Topic sentence is a specific sentence that introduces the topic covered in the paragraph. And we've already looked at quite a bit with the elements of argument, and so the topic of the first paragraph in our example paper is this idea of safety. And so in my first sentence of my paragraph, in my topic sentence, that idea needs to be present. And what it does is it brings this cohesiveness to your paper so that it's very clear, this is the point of this paragraph. I shouldn't have to read partway through to try and figure it out. It should be clear from the get-go what that main point is. So here's an example that puts those two pieces together. First, and you can see I've done first, it is appropriate in many situations. Just consider the other ones as well. First, vaccines are researched and tested to make sure they are safe. It doesn't have to be an elaborate sentence. It can be very simple. It just needs to accomplish those two purposes. Transition, so I can move from my introduction into my first point. And then the idea of safety, which I've presented in my claim already, is presented again just for clarity. I know what the point of this paragraph is, and then it's an anchor for everything else in that paragraph. I should only be talking about this idea of safety in that paragraph. So there's my transition, and there's my topic word. Okay, concluding statement. So this is after you've already done your evidence, your reasoning, your counterargument, and your rebuttal. Then you would conclude the paragraph with what we call a concluding statement. So essays as a whole, as you know, conclude, and so should each paragraph. Each paragraph should have at least one statement that wraps it all up. You want to condense the ideas presented, connect them to the main point, and connect that main point back to the claim. Very much the same as with reasoning, but now it's for the entire paragraph, not just for a single piece of evidence. So if it helps to think of it that way, it's very much like reasoning in that it has those kind of 3 components. It wraps up the ideas, connects the main point, connects to the claim. So here's a concluding statement example. Vaccines are researched, reviewed, and monitored after their release to ensure that they are safe. Therefore, safety should not be an issue when determining if vaccines should be mandatory. So you can see that the first little bit reviews this pieces of evidence. I've talked about them being researched, I've talked about them being reviewed and monitored. Those are ideas that my evidence brought up, so I've just summarized them. I've brought up my topic word several times, this idea of safety, and then ultimately I've tied it back to my claim of vaccines should be mandatory. So you can see that it's done all three of those. It's recapped, it's pointed out the topic, and it's connected back to the claim. So next we're going to talk about a hamburger. It's just serving as an analogy. So first in a paragraph is a transition and topic sentence. That is your top bun. Then you get your first piece of evidence. That is your lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, cheese, things like that. And if you're not a fan of hamburgers, maybe this analogy won't work for you. However, a hamburger is way better if it has those things on it, right? You want those mustard, ketchup, pickles, tomatoes, those kinds of things on there. However, your evidence really isn't the most important part. It works for you, it serves a purpose, but really it is your reasoning for that evidence that is the meat of this hamburger and of your paragraph. Because if I just throw out a statistic or a fact such as vaccines are tested for 10 years, so what? That really has very little value unless I throw in the meat. That pickle's only so good until I throw in the meat that goes with it. And that's reasoning. And then you can see you do it again. So you've got your evidence 2, you have another layer of condiments, and then you have reasoning for evidence 2, again, another piece of meat. You have your counter argument, again, important, but more important than that, again, as meat, is your rebuttal. Your counter argument is great, but you really want to follow it up with a rebuttal. That's the meat of that part. And then we get our bottom bun, and that is our concluding statement. So that's just a way to maybe help you think about how to put all these pieces together into one whole. So it's kind of a fun analogy. If it helps, great. Otherwise, it's just a visual to kind of tie in everything we have talked about. The other thing I want to do is then look at an actual paragraph. I've spaced the items out. In an actual paragraph, you would just keep going. But let's look at each piece all together. None of these pieces are really new. We've seen them all along. And now we get to see it in one piece. So first we get our transition and the topic sentence. First, vaccines are researched and tested to make sure they are safe. According to the Center for Disease Control, we've read this piece of evidence many times. I've got my evidence, I've got my citation, then I've got my reasoning to go with that. I have summarized the evidence, I have pointed out the topic and connected to the claim. I've got my second piece of evidence, this one's new. After studies have been conducted on vaccines, organizations including the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Academy of Family Physicians review the results of vaccination studies. My reasoning for that, vaccines are only made available to the public when they have been extensively researched and reviewed for safety by multiple reputable organizations. That's my restatement. Notice this time that my reasoning did need to be 2 sentences. That is okay. It doesn't have to all fit together in one statement. So I've accomplished one task with one statement. My second statement accomplishes steps 2 and 3, which is connecting it to my main point, connecting it to my claim. And I follow it up and say, this is done to ensure the safety of vaccines, so there should be no issue when making them mandatory. Counter argument, we've seen this before. They are arguing directly the opposite. They are saying that because of side effects, they are unsafe. I need to rebuttal that, which we've also seen before. Again, I mentioned this idea of safety because I want to rebuttal specifically their claim of unsafe. And then here's the concluding statement that we just looked at. And so that's what it looks like when all of those pieces go together. And that is the end of the lesson for elements of argument and paragraphing. In the next lesson, we are going to look at the entire paper together. You will see these same components again, but then you'll get to see the rest of the paper, the introduction, the second and third point, as well as the conclusion. So that's in the next video, so stay tuned for that.